7 years. That's how long I arranged his schedule, managed his pack, raised his son, and slept on the far edge of a king-size bed like a decorative pillow he never touched. 7 years, and the first time Elliot Graves actually looked at me was the morning I walked out the door with my suitcase. Funny how that works. My name is Caleb Whitmore, and I used to be the most invisible man in the state of Connecticut. Not because I was plain, not because I was quiet. I was invisible because I chose to be. Because loving Elliot Graves required me to shrink myself down to nothing, fold my edges in, and exist just enough to be useful and not enough to be noticed. And I was very good at it. Too good, honestly. Gold star level. Employee of the year, except the job title was ignored mate and the benefits package was emotional starvation with a side of really nice kitchen appliances. I set his coffee down on the marble counter at exactly 6:47 every morning. Dark roast, no sugar, a splash of oat milk he'd never admit he liked. I packed Mason's lunch with those little dinosaur-shaped sandwiches he loved. I signed the pack documents Elliot left on the kitchen island because he was always 3 rooms away and 3 conversations deep and never, ever, ever had 60 seconds for me. I told myself it was fine. I told myself this was what mated life looked like when your alpha ran a powerful pack in Hartford, Connecticut. Busy men had distracted eyes. It didn't mean he didn't love me. It just meant he forgot you existed most days, Caleb. Yeah, that, I have psychometry. It's my secondary designation gift, the ability to touch an object and read its entire emotional history. Every scar, every secret, every moment of joy or grief soaked into its surface like a fingerprint. It sounds useful, and it is, mostly, except when you're living in a house full of objects that scream the same story at you every single time you touch them. The wedding ring on the nightstand? Cold. Obligation. Relief when removed. The framed photo of our mating ceremony in the hallway? Pride, but not in me. In the optics of the event. The blanket Mason dragged everywhere. The one I knitted by hand during 3 sleepless nights. Pure love, warmth, safety. That one I could hold for hours. That one never lied. I found out Elliot was bringing Dominic Ashworth to the Pack Founders Gala. His choice, not mine. On a Tuesday. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I stood in the kitchen in my socks, holding the invitation envelope with both hands, and I felt it. This is easier without you there. Not Elliot's voice, just the feeling sealed into the paper, honest the way only objects could be. He hadn't even thought about me when he wrote Dominic's name on that RSVP. He just hadn't thought about me. I set the envelope down. I made Mason's dinosaur sandwich. I packed the lunch. I set the coffee on the counter. And that night, after Mason was asleep and Elliot hadn't come home yet, I sat on the bathroom floor with my back against the cold tub, and I had a conversation with myself that was 7 years overdue. You have a superpower that lets you feel the truth of every object in this house, and every single one of them tells you the same thing. He doesn't see you. He has never seen you. So why are you still here? I didn't have a good answer. That was the problem. I started packing the next morning. 1 suitcase, the essentials, Mason's favorite dinosaur plush, because wherever I landed, he would visit me, and I refused to let him arrive somewhere without something familiar. I didn't take the wedding ring. I touched it one last time, standing at the nightstand, and felt the whole cold weight of it. Duty, distance, 7 years of silence. I set it back down carefully, like I was returning something that had never actually belonged to me. Elliot was in his home office when I rolled my suitcase into the foyer. Door open, phone pressed to his ear, eyes on his laptop screen. He looked up, and for the first time in 7 years, Elliot Graves actually saw me. Not the coffee, not the schedule, not the mate who kept his world running so smoothly he never had to notice the machinery. Me. His face did something complicated. His lips parted. I smiled. And I meant it, which was the strangest part. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't a performance. It was the first genuinely peaceful smile I'd worn in this house in years. I'll have my lawyer contact yours, I said pleasantly. The coffee's already made. Dark roast, oat milk, Don't forget Mason's dentist appointment on Thursday. And then I walked out. The door clicked shut behind me like punctuation, like the period at the end of a sentence I should have finished a long time ago. Outside, the October air was crisp and sharp and tasted like freedom. I sat in my car, hands on the wheel, heart doing something between laughing and breaking. And I thought, Caleb Whitmore, you should have done this 6 years and 11 months ago. But here's what nobody tells you about finally leaving. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like surviving. And sometimes that's enough. I held on to that thought the way Mason held on to his dinosaur plush. Tight, slightly desperate, refusing to let go even when it got a little uncomfortable. My car sat idling in the driveway for exactly 4 minutes. I know because I watched the dashboard clock like it personally owed me money. 6:52, 6:53, 6:54, 6:55. I was waiting, if I'm being honest. Not for Elliot to come running out. Not for some dramatic movie moment where the front door flies open and he stands there in his perfectly pressed shirt, eyes wrecked, voice cracking, saying my name like it meant something. I was waiting to feel guilty. It never came. 6:56. I backed out of the driveway and drove away from the most expensive cage in Hartford, Connecticut. The first thing I did was call my best friend. Theo Raines picked up on the second ring, which meant he was either already awake or he'd been waiting for this call for approximately 7 years. Knowing Theo, it was the second one. I left, I said. Silence. Then the sound of what I could only describe as restrained jubilation being physically suppressed through sheer force of will. I'm not going to say I told you so, Theo said carefully. You're absolutely going to say it. I told you so, Caleb. I told you so in 2018. I told you so at your mating ceremony, when you were standing at that altar looking like a man walking into a very beautiful prison. I told you so every single Thanksgiving when Elliot spent the entire dinner talking to his beta lieutenants, and you just quietly refilled everyone's glasses like some kind of gorgeous overqualified. Theo, you left. Oh my God, you actually left. Where are you? Currently passing the Dunkin' on Route 44. Pull over, I'm making waffles. I almost cried then, not from sadness, from the specific relief of being someone's first priority for the first time in longer than I could remember. I pulled over. Theo lived 20 minutes from the Graves estate in a warm, slightly chaotic apartment above a bookstore in the kind of neighborhood where people still knew their neighbors' names. It smelled like coffee and old paper and something cinnamon from the bakery 2 doors down. The moment he opened the door, he pulled me into a hug that lasted long enough to be medically significant. You good, he murmured into my shoulder. I'm something, I said. I haven't figured out what yet. He pulled back and looked at me. Theo had known me since we were 17, scrawny and confused and just beginning to understand what it meant to present as Omega in a world that had very specific ideas about what that was supposed to look like. He knew every version of my face. He studied this one carefully. You look lighter, he said finally. I left a 6,000 square foot house. Physically, I am significantly less burdened, yes. He laughed and let me inside. The waffles were perfect, crispy edges, soft center, the kind that made you close your eyes on the first bite because some things in life still delivered exactly what they promised. I sat at Theo's kitchen counter with maple syrup on my thumb and my suitcase parked by the door. And for the first time in recent memory, I was not tracking anyone else's schedule, needs, or emotional temperature. It was so quiet inside my own head it was almost loud. So, what's the plan? Theo asked, sliding onto the stool across from me. Survive today. Figure out tomorrow. Tomorrow. Very inspirational. You should put that on a mug. I'm serious. I have a good attorney. Elliot won't fight dirty. He's too proud to look like the bad guy in a divorce. Mason is 8. He knows I love him, and I'm going to make sure he knows this isn't about him. I took another bite of waffle. And I have my consulting work. I never stopped taking clients, even when Elliot made it clear he thought it was a hobby. Theo's expression did something sharp and brief. He'd always hated that particular dismissal more than I had, which I appreciated. Good, Hachon, he said. So you have income, a plan, a lawyer, and my couch for as long as you need it. I'm not sleeping on your couch, Theo. I'm a grown Omega with standards. I have a guest room. I'm sleeping in your guest room. He smiled, then quieter. He's going to come after you, you know. I licked maple syrup off my thumb and shrugged. Let him. Theo tilted his head. That's new. 7 years of psychometry in that house, I said simply. I touched every object Elliot Graves owned. His briefcase, his cufflinks, the pen he signed our mating contract with. You know what I never once felt in any of them? Theo waited. Urgency, I said. He never felt urgent about me. Not once. I picked up my fork. So if he comes after me now, it won't be because he loves me. It'll be because I'm gone. And those are two very different things. The apartment settled around us. Somewhere below, the bookstore was opening. I could hear the soft bell above the door, the shuffle of the first customer of the morning. Outside, Hartford was waking up without me in it, the way Elliot expected. My phone buzzed on the counter. I turned it over. Elliot Graves, calling. I looked at it for exactly 3 seconds. Then I set it face down, took another bite of waffle, and decided that syrup this good deserved my full attention. Syrup this good deserved my full attention. So I gave it exactly that. The waffle was perfect. The coffee Theo slid across the counter was strong enough to reset a person's entire nervous system. The bookstore below us was humming with that specific early morning quiet that felt like the world was still deciding what kind of day it wanted to be. My phone buzzed again. I didn't move. Theo watched me with the careful expression of someone who had front row seats to history being made and was smart enough not to ruin it by talking. Third buzz, fourth, then silence. I exhaled slowly through my nose and took a long sip of coffee. He called 4 times, Theo said, with the practiced neutrality of a man who absolutely had opinions. I know. In 6 minutes. I can count, Theo. He never called you 4 times in 6 minutes in 7 years. No, I agreed pleasantly. He did not. I set my mug down and looked at my phone the way you look at a spider you've trapped under a glass. Present. Contained. Not your immediate problem. Here is what I knew about Elliot Graves, courtesy of 7 years of living with him and a psychometric ability that made lying to me essentially pointless. He was not calling because his heart was broken. He was calling because something in his world had shifted without his permission, and Elliot Graves did not tolerate unauthorized shifting. The man color-coded his calendar. He had opinions about throw pillow placement. The idea that his Omega, his mated Omega, had simply picked up a suitcase and walked out of his perfectly managed life without a screaming match or a dramatic breakdown was probably causing him a very specific kind of existential distress. Not grief. Distress. There was a difference, I knew it in my bones. My phone lit up again. This time it wasn't a call, it was a text. I turned the screen over just far enough to read the preview without fully committing to engagement. Caleb, we need to talk. Where are you? No question mark. Of course. Elliot Graves didn't ask questions so much as he issued them, statements dressed up in question-shaped clothing. I put the phone face down again. What did it say? Theo asked. That we need to talk. Classic. No question mark. Theo pointed at me. Emotionally illiterate. I've been saying this for years. Clinically, demonstrably. Theo, I love you. Finish your waffle. He finished his waffle. The thing nobody tells you about finally leaving a situation you've outgrown is that the silence afterward is not empty. It's full. Absolutely packed with all the things you spent years not letting yourself feel, because feeling them would have made staying impossible. I sat in Theo's kitchen with morning light coming through the window at a warm, unhurried angle, and I let myself feel them. The PAC Founders Gala invitation. Dominic Ashworth's name where mine should have been. The particular exhaustion of being the most capable person in a room that never once acknowledged it. I pressed my fingertip to the edge of Theo's coffee mug absently, not really meaning to read it, and got a warm rush of easy emotion. Contentment, laughter, a memory of Theo making terrible scrambled eggs at 2 a.m. and laughing at himself about it. I pulled my hand back and smiled. This was a good mug. This was a good apartment. This was a good friend. I was going to be okay. My phone buzzed again. Different rhythm this time. A call, but not Elliot's number. I frowned and turned it over. Mason. iPad. My chest did something immediate and complicated. I picked up before the second buzz finished. Hey, Bug. Dad. Mason's voice was small and careful in the way that 8-year-olds get when they're trying very hard to sound like they're not worried. Where are you? I kept my voice easy, warm, the same voice I used when he woke up from bad dreams and needed to hear that the world was still the right size. I'm at Uncle Theo's place having waffles. Did you eat breakfast? A pause. Daddy made the eggs wrong. I pressed my lips together. Elliot Graves, who had never once made breakfast in 7 years, had apparently attempted eggs this morning. The image of that alone was almost worth the price of admission. Wrong how? I asked. They're kind of brown on the bottom. Did you eat them anyway? Most of them. Good man. I softened my voice just slightly. Mason, you know this isn't about you, right? Another pause, longer this time. I know, he said. Dad said you needed some space. Something moved through my chest at that, sharp and quiet. Elliot had told him I needed space. Not that we were having problems. Not that something was wrong. Just space, which was either surprisingly considerate or a calculated temporary narrative, and I genuinely wasn't sure which. Uncle Theo says hi, I said instead. Tell him I want waffles too. I'll tell him. Go get ready for school. I'll call you tonight, okay? Okay. Then, quieter. Dad? Yeah. Your plants, Mason said seriously. The ones in the kitchen window. You forgot them. I closed my eyes for exactly 1 second. Of course he noticed the plants. Water them for me, I said softly. Just a little. Not too much. I know, Dad. I'm not a baby. I know you're not. Love you, Bug. Love you, he mumbled, already distracted by something off-screen. The call ended. Theo was quiet across the counter, giving me the gift of not commenting. I picked up my coffee, took a slow sip, looked out the window at the Hartford morning moving past like nothing in the world had changed. My plants were still in that kitchen window, and for the first time since I'd driven away, something in my chest pulled, not back, just sideways. The particular ache of a life you'd tended carefully. Still growing somewhere you no longer lived. Leaving isn't one moment. It's 100 small ones that come after, and some of them have your kid's voice in them. Those are the hardest ones. I sat with that for a moment. Just sat with it. The way you sit with a bruise you keep accidentally pressing because some part of you needs to confirm it's still real. Then I finished my coffee, because I was Caleb Whitmore, and I did not spiral before noon. It was a personal rule, one of my better ones. Theo refilled my mug without being asked, which was why he was my best friend and not just a person I knew. There is a specific love language that exists between people who have watched each other fall apart and back together enough times that coffee refills become fluent conversation. You're thinking loud, he said. I'm always thinking loud. You just usually have music on. Do you want me to put music on? No. I wrap both hands around the mug. I want to figure out what Elliot is actually feeling right now, and I can't do that from here because I don't have any of his objects. Theo leaned his elbow on the counter. You could just call him back. I gave him a look so flat it could have been used as a spirit level. Or not, Theo said agreeably. Here was my honest assessment of Elliot Graves at this precise moment, constructed entirely from 7 years of observation and a working knowledge of alpha psychology. He was standing somewhere in that house right now, probably the kitchen, because that was where I had always been, and absence tends to send people back to the last place a person existed. He was looking at the coffee I'd made, which was probably cold by now. He was experiencing something that felt urgent and unfamiliar and mildly inconvenient, and he was categorizing it the way he categorized everything, trying to find the correct folder in his very organized mind to file the feeling under. The problem was, the feeling didn't have a folder. Because Elliot had never had to miss me before, I had always been there, right there, within arm's reach, within earshot, within the same perfectly appointed house. He had spent 7 years being able to reach for me without actually reaching, knowing I was present the way people know their keys are on the hook by the door. You don't think about your keys when they're on the hook. You think about them the second they're gone. My phone lit up again on the counter. Not a call this time. Another text. I turned it over with one finger. I need to know you're safe. I stared at that for a long moment. Theo read it upside down from across the counter and made a sound that was not quite a word. Interesting, I said. Is it? He's never once texted me that in 7 years. I set the phone back down. Not when I drove to Boston in a snowstorm for his PAC meeting. Not when my flight back from his Alpha conference got delayed 6 hours. Not once. I tilted my head. But I leave with a suitcase and suddenly he needs to know I'm safe. Because you were always there before, Theo said quietly. He didn't have to wonder. Exactly. I picked up my fork, realized the waffle was gone, and set the fork back down with the dignity of a man who had made peace with that loss. I'm not going to respond yet, I said. Not because I'm playing games. I genuinely need him to sit in the not knowing for a little while. He's never had to do that. He should try it. It's very educational. Theo raised his coffee mug in a small, solemn salute. 20 minutes later, there was a knock at Theo's apartment door. We both looked at it. Then we looked at each other. I did not tell anyone you were here, Theo said immediately, with the energy of a man establishing his innocence before the charges were read. I know you didn't. I was already reading the air, that particular instinct that came with psychometry, the way a scent or a presence could arrive before a person fully did. And I knew that scent. I knew it the way you know a song you didn't choose to memorize but had heard so many times it lived in you anyway. Cedar and cold air and something underneath that was specifically, unmistakably Elliot. My jaw tightened exactly once. Then I smoothed my expression out, stood up from the counter stool with the unhurried grace of someone who had absolutely been expecting this and was completely unbothered by it, and walked to the door. I opened it. Elliot Graves stood in the hallway outside Theo's apartment, looking like a man who had driven 20 minutes in a state of controlled panic and was now working very hard to look like he hadn't. His jaw was set. His hair was slightly less perfect than usual. He was still in the shirt he'd been wearing when I left, collar open one button, which for Elliot was basically the equivalent of showing up in pajamas. His eyes found me immediately, and they did the thing. The thing I had almost forgotten they could do. That sharp, total focus that used to make me feel like the most important thing in any room, before I realized he saved it exclusively for problems he needed to solve. You're not answering your phone, he said. I leaned against the doorframe with one shoulder, arms loose at my sides, chin level. I know, I said pleasantly. His nostrils moved slightly, reading my scent the way alphas did when words weren't giving them enough information. Whatever he found there made something flicker behind his eyes. Caleb. Elliot. He looked at me like a man trying to locate a door in a wall that had never needed one before. Can we talk? I considered him for a moment, the set of his shoulders, the controlled tension in his hands. The way he was standing close enough to be heard but not close enough to crowd me, which was actually more self-aware than I'd expected. You drove all the way here, I said, to say 3 words you could have texted. I needed to see you. The words landed quieter than I expected, less commanding, almost honest. Almost. I studied his face and felt nothing from him directly because psychometry required contact and I was keeping very deliberate distance. But I didn't need his objects to read this moment. He was scared, not of losing a mate, not yet, of losing control of a situation he hadn't realized was already gone. I'm safe, I said evenly, as you can see. I pushed off the door frame and began to close the door at a calm, conversational pace. Drive safe, Elliot. Caleb, wait. The door clicked shut. Behind me, Theo exhaled like a man who had just watched someone defuse a very elegant bomb. That, he said reverently, was the most dignified thing I have ever witnessed in person. I walked back to the counter, sat down and picked up my empty fork again. Do you have more waffles? I asked. Theo was already moving to the freezer with the focused energy of a man who understood that some emotional victories deserved carbohydrate reinforcement. I have exactly 2 left, he said, and I was saving them for a special occasion. Does this count? Caleb. You just closed the door in an alpha's face and immediately requested breakfast. This is the most special occasion I have witnessed since my college graduation. He dropped the waffles in the toaster. Possibly more special than that, actually. I smiled and propped my chin in my hand. Outside, I heard the elevator at the end of Theo's hallway engage. Elliot leaving. The sound of it was smaller than I expected. Just a mechanical hum and then nothing. The building settling back into its ordinary morning sounds like the interruption had never happened. I breathed through it. The waffles popped up. Theo plated them without ceremony and slid them across the counter with the maple syrup, and I ate in the kind of comfortable silence that only exists between people who have known each other long enough that quiet is its own conversation. Halfway through the second waffle, my psychometry did the thing it sometimes did when I was emotionally unsettled. It sharpened, became more present, like the ability could sense I needed information and was volunteering itself. I pressed my palm flat against the surface of Theo's kitchen counter without thinking. Warmth, years of shared meals, an argument about something minor that resolved itself in under an hour. A phone call taken here with shaking hands that ended in relief. Theo's life layered into the laminate like rings in a tree. I pulled my hand back and rubbed my thumb across my palm. "You just read my counter," Theo said. "Your counter is very emotionally healthy." "Thank you. I've worked on it." I looked down at my plate. The thing about psychometry was that it told you the truth whether you were ready for it or not. Objects didn't editorialize. They didn't soften things for your benefit or protect your feelings. They just held what they held, honest and complete. Which was why I had spent 7 years in that house knowing things I kept choosing to unknow. I set my fork down. "Can I tell you something I've never said out loud?" I asked. Theo turned from the sink. His expression shifted into the particular attentiveness he reserved for moments that mattered. "Always. The mating bond document. The one we signed at the ceremony." I kept my voice even. "I touched it about a year in. I wasn't trying to read it. I just picked it up to file it, and it hit me before I could put my walls up." Theo was very still. "Elliot signed it feeling relieved," I said. "Not happy, not in love, relieved. Like he'd resolved a complicated logistical problem and could move on to the next item." I picked up my coffee mug, mostly for something to hold. The contract itself felt like a business arrangement to him. Efficient, sensible, good for the PAC's political standing. The kitchen was quiet. "And you stayed," Theo said softly. Not an accusation, just the shape of the truth lay gently on the counter between us. "I stayed," I confirmed. "Because I touched it and I felt that, and then I looked at Mason asleep in his crib down the hall, and I thought, maybe love grows. Maybe it starts practical and becomes real. Maybe I can be patient enough to wait for the version of this that feels like what it was supposed to be." I set the mug down. "I was very patient," I said. "You were," Theo agreed quietly. "Too patient." "Also, yes." I exhaled slowly. The last object I read in that house before I packed my bag was his watch, the one he's worn every day for 4 years. I picked it up off the bathroom counter, and I got 7 seconds of his most recent emotional imprint. Theo leaned against the sink, waiting. "Dominic Ashworth," I said simply. The name sat in the air between us, like something with weight. Not guilt from Elliot, not desire exactly. Something more complicated and more damaging than either. Attention. The specific, focused, interested attention that Elliot had never once turned toward me, transferred wholesale onto someone else, worn into the metal of his watch like a groove. Nothing physical, I added, because Theo's expression had gone somewhere sharp. At least not yet, not that I could read, but the attention was real, the interest was real, and I was so thoroughly absent from that imprint that I might as well have been a piece of furniture he'd stopped noticing. Theo was quiet for a long moment. Then he said carefully and with great precision, "I would like to say something extremely rude about Elliot Graves." "You may." He said it. It was thorough. I appreciated both the creativity and the commitment. "Feel better?" I asked. "Marginally." He pushed off the sink and came to sit beside me at the counter. "Caleb, what you just described is not a marriage that lost its spark. That is a man who never showed up to the marriage in the first place." "I know. You deserve someone who imprints on you," he said firmly. "Someone whose watch you pick up and all you feel is you. Just you, taking up all the space." My throat did something inconvenient. I pressed my lips together and nodded once, short and controlled, because I was not going to cry into Theo's second-to-last waffle. That was a line I intended to hold. My phone lit up on the counter again. This time the name stopped me completely. Not Elliot, Dominic Ashworth. I stared at it. Theo read it over my shoulder and inhaled sharply. The call rang once, twice. I picked up. There are moments that arrive without permission and rearrange everything. This was one of them, and somehow I already knew it was going to hurt. I pressed the phone to my ear. Dominic, I said. My voice came out clean and level, which honestly impressed me because my heart had just done something athletic. A pause, then a voice smooth and carefully modulated. The kind of voice that had probably practiced itself into that particular frequency. Caleb, I'm glad you picked up. Are you? I know this is unexpected. Dominic, you calling my personal number at 8 in the morning is several things. Unexpected is the polite version. Another pause, shorter this time. I heard you left. My jaw tightened briefly. Elliot had told him, or someone had. The pack moved information the way water moved through old pipes, finding every crack, arriving places it had no business being. News travels fast, I said pleasantly. I wanted to reach out before things got complicated. His voice shifted, warmer, the kind of warm that costs something to produce. I want you to know that whatever you're thinking right now about me and Elliot, it isn't what it looks like. I was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then I said, what does it look like, Dominic? He didn't answer immediately. And in that silence, I heard the thing he hadn't said, which was that he knew exactly what it looked like. And he had called me specifically because he needed to manage my perception of it before it became a problem for him. Not concern, control. We're colleagues, he said finally. That's all we've ever been. I appreciate you clarifying that. I kept my voice warm and completely empty of meaning. Was there something specific you needed, or was this more of a wellness check? Caleb. His voice softened further. I genuinely like you. I always have. And I think you deserve honesty, which is why I'm calling. Elliot is confused right now. He doesn't fully understand what he wants. But he cares about you in his way. In his way. 2 words that did the work of an entire autopsy. In his way, I repeated. I just don't want to see you make a permanent decision based on a feeling. I looked across the counter at Theo, who could hear enough of the tone through the phone that his expression had gone very still and very sharp, the face he made when he was deciding whether something required immediate intervention. I held up one finger. I've got this. Dominic, I said, with the patient, pleasant energy of someone explaining something simple to someone they had completely figured out. I want you to hear me carefully. I left because 7 years of being invisible inside my own mating bond finally reached a conclusion that was unavoidable. That decision has nothing to do with you. I pause. Except for the part where it does. But we don't need to get into that right now. Silence. A different quality of silence than before. Less managed. I don't know what you think you know, he said, and his voice had dropped the warmth now. The practiced smoothness was still there, but the temperature under it had changed. I don't think anything, I said honestly. That's not how my ability works. Another silence. This one had texture. Right, he said slowly. The psychometry. The psychometry, I confirmed. What happened next was subtle enough that someone without my particular sensitivity to emotional shifts might have missed it entirely. His breathing pattern changed. Fractionally, the kind of adjustment a person makes when they are recalculating in real time. Going back through a mental catalog of every object I might have touched in the last 7 years. Wondering which ones had talked. Good, I thought. Wonder about that. I'm not your enemy, Caleb, he said finally. I never said you were. I leaned one elbow on the counter. But I'll tell you what I find interesting, Dominic. Elliot called me 4 times this morning. He drove 20 minutes to stand in a hallway, and none of that moved me to pick up or open a door. I let that sit for exactly a breath. You called once, and I picked up immediately. Do you know why? He didn't answer. Because I wanted to hear what you'd say, I said simply. I wanted to know which angle you'd come from. And now I know. So I appreciate the call. Genuinely. Caleb, drive safe, Dominic. I ended the call, set the phone on the counter face down, pressed both palms flat against the laminate, and took one slow, measured breath through my nose. Theo was looking at me with an expression that was equal parts admiration and concern, the particular combination that meant he was about to say something careful. He called you to manage you, Theo said. Yes, which means there's something to manage. Yes, which means it isn't just colleagues. No, I agreed. It isn't. I lifted my hands off the counter. The laminate gave me nothing, just Theo's accumulated warmth, the same as before. But my own hands were telling me something. The faint residual vibration that sometimes clung after a call, the same way heat clung to a pan after the flame was off. Dominic Ashworth was not just worried about optics. He was worried about what I knew. And people only worried like that when there was something real to protect. I picked up my coffee mug, found it empty, and held it anyway because sometimes you needed something in your hands that didn't talk back. He's not innocent, I said quietly, not angrily, just as a fact, the same way you'd note the weather. Theo nodded once. So what do you do with that? He asked. I looked at the bottom of my empty mug for a moment. Nothing yet, I said. I let him think I'm just hurt and leaving. I let Elliot think this is about being ignored. I set the mug down carefully. And I wait to see what crawls out from under the rock when they both think I'm not paying attention. Theo was quiet for a beat. You're terrifying, he said finally. Lovingly, but terrifying. I prefer strategically patient. You can be both. My phone lit up again on the counter. This time it was a notification. Not a call, not a text. A news alert from the Hartford PAC registry, the kind that only went out to bonded mates and senior PAC members. PAC Alpha Elliot Graves has filed a formal mate retrieval request. I stared at it. A mate retrieval request. An actual, formal, documented PAC law mate retrieval request. The kind that hadn't been filed in Connecticut in 11 years because it was considered aggressively archaic, and most alphas had enough self-awareness to understand why. Theo leaned over and read it. He did not, Theo said flatly. He did. He filed a retrieval request? He filed a retrieval request. Theo stood up straight, pointed at my phone, and said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then, Caleb, that man has lost his entire mind. I looked at the notification one more time, and then, for the first time all morning, I laughed. Really laughed. The full kind, from somewhere genuine. Because only Elliot Graves, faced with an Omega, who had quietly, peacefully, and with excellent dignity chosen to walk away, would respond by filing paperwork. Some men buy flowers, some men show up in the rain. Elliot Graves filed a formal legal document, and somehow that told me more about our 7 years than anything else he'd ever done. The laughter faded slowly, the way good laughter does, leaving something quieter and more complicated in its place. I set my phone down, stared at the notification one more time. A mate retrieval request was not a romantic gesture. I want to be very clear about that. It was not Elliot standing in the rain with his heart in his hands. It was Elliot doing what Elliot had always done when something in his world stopped cooperating. He filed paperwork, he engaged a system, he pulled a lever, he converted a human problem into a procedural one because procedures had steps, and steps had outcomes, and outcomes could be controlled. 7 years. 7 years. And this man's first real move was to treat my leaving like a missing asset report. The quiet that settled over me then was not peaceful. It was the specific stillness that comes right before something breaks. Caleb, Theo said carefully, I'm fine. You have your flat face on. I have a resting face, Theo. It's called bone structure. You have your flat face on, he repeated, with the gentle firmness of someone who had known me through every version of fine I had ever claimed to be. Talk to me. I pressed my fingertips to the edge of my phone without picking it up. Cold. Clean. The phone was new enough that it hadn't absorbed much yet. Just the ghost of this morning's call sitting in the glass like a fingerprint. Urgency. Elliot's calls. Calculation. Dominic's. I pulled my hand back. He's not doing this because he loves me, I said. My voice came out steady. I was proud of it for that. He filed that request because a mate retrieval puts a legal hold on the dissolution process. It freezes everything for 30 days while the pack mediator assesses whether the separation is voluntary. I looked up at Theo. It's a delay tactic dressed up as devotion. Theo's expression confirmed he had arrived at the same conclusion approximately 30 seconds before I said it out loud. He bought himself a month, Theo said. He bought himself a month, I agreed. The anger arrived then. Not hot, not dramatic, just steady and clean and entirely clarifying. The kind of anger that doesn't make you want to throw things. It makes you want to be extremely precise. I picked up my phone and called my attorney. Petra Voss picked up on the first ring because she was the kind of attorney who picked up on the first ring and charged accordingly, and she was worth every cent. I saw the filing, she said before I could speak. I've been waiting for your call. Can he do this? Legally, yes. Connecticut still recognizes the mate retrieval provision under pack family law. It's archaic and most judges treat it with approximately the respect it deserves, but it's valid. A pause. It freezes the dissolution process for 30 days. However, her voice shifted into the register she used when she had something good. It also compels him to appear before a pack mediator and formally articulate why the retrieval is in the bonded Omega's best interest, not his, yours. I was quiet for a moment. So he has to stand in front of a mediator, I said slowly, and explain, on record, why dragging me back serves my well-being. Correct. And if he can't adequately demonstrate that, the request is dismissed and the dissolution proceeds with a favorable notation regarding bad faith filing. Another pause, warmer this time. Caleb. He handed us something. I exhaled through my nose. Schedule the mediation as early as possible, I said. I want this resolved, not delayed. Already on it, I'll have dates to you within the hour. I ended the call. Theo was watching me with an expression that had moved from concern into something closer to quiet awe. You're not going to let this rattle you, he said. Not a question. Oh, it's rattling me, I said honestly. I'm just rattling quietly where he can't see it. I stood up from the counter stool and walked to Theo's living room window. Hartford spread out below in the October light, ordinary and unhurried, people moving through their morning with no idea that somewhere across the city, a man was filing legal documents about me like I was a misplaced piece of pack property. I pressed 2 fingers lightly against the window glass. Cold. The city outside. 100 accumulated moments of Theo standing here, looking out, thinking. Peace. Solitude. The particular texture of a life lived entirely on one's own terms. I wanted that. I had wanted it for a long time and only just admitted it. My phone buzzed one more time. I looked at it. A text from Elliot. Not a call this time. I know what I did. I know I wasn't there the way I should have been, but I am not ready to let you go. Please give me 30 days. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, slowly, paying attention to every word the way my psychometry had trained me to pay attention to things, not just the surface, the structure underneath. I know what I did. Past tense. Acknowledgement. I wasn't there the way I should have been. Passive. Distanced. Not I ignored you, but I wasn't there, as though his absence had been something that happened to us rather than something he chose. I am not ready to let you go. His feelings, his readiness, his timeline. Not one word about mine, not one word about what I needed, what I'd lost, what 7 years of invisibility had cost me. Just his readiness, his terms, his 30 days. I set the phone face down on the windowsill, and I felt it then. The thing I had been holding very carefully all morning behind the sass and the waffles and the steady voice. The grief, not for the marriage, for the version of it I had believed in for 7 years. The one I had tended like those plants on the kitchen windowsill, giving it light and water and patience. Convinced that care alone could make something grow in soil that was never fertile to begin with. My eyes stayed dry, but something in my chest cracked open, quiet and total, like ice giving way in early spring. Then Theo's door rattled with 3 sharp knocks. Not the elevator this time, someone already on the floor. I turned from the window. Theo was already moving toward the door with the careful expression of a man who had a very bad feeling. He checked the peephole. He turned back to me, and the look on his face told me everything before he said a word. "It's not Elliot," he said quietly. "No," I said, because I could already smell it. Cedar was gone. What came through the door gap now was something darker, colder. A scent with intention threaded through it like wire. "It's Dominic," Theo said. I straightened, rolled my shoulders back once, slowly, and smiled the specific smile I reserved for situations that required me to be the most dangerous version of calm I possessed. "Well then," I said, "let's see what he actually came to say. There is a difference between a man who comes to apologize and a man who comes to assess the damage." I had spent 7 years learning that difference the hard way. I was not about to miss it now. Theo looked at me with his hand still on the doorknob, waiting for my signal. That was the thing about a friendship built over 15 years. You developed a whole silent language made of eyebrows and micro-expressions and the precise angle of a person's chin. My chin said, "Open it." Theo opened the door. Dominic Ashworth was taller than I remembered. Or maybe he just took up more space than he used to, the way people do when they've spent enough time in rooms where everyone deferred to them. He was alpha, but not pack-ranked, the kind of alpha who operated in professional hierarchies rather than territorial ones. Expensive coat, careful hair. The particular grooming of a man who understood that appearance was its own argument. His eyes went to me immediately. He smiled. It was a good smile. Practiced the way Theo's counter was practiced. Worn smooth by repetition until it felt almost natural. "Caleb," he said warmly, "I'm glad you're okay." "You said that on the phone," I said, 15 minutes ago. "I was in the area." I looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Theo stepped back from the doorway with the energy of a man removing himself from blast radius while remaining close enough to witness everything. "Come in," I said. Dominic stepped inside. His scent came with him, filling Theo's warm apartment with something that didn't belong there. Not unpleasant exactly, just wrong, the way a sound is wrong when it arrives in the right place at the wrong time. I didn't offer him coffee. He stood in the middle of Theo's living room and looked around once, briefly cataloging. I watched him do it, the slight assessment in his eyes as he took in the space, the suitcase by the door, the 2 coffee mugs on the counter, the open maple syrup. He looked at the suitcase the longest. "You really left," he said, something in his voice I couldn't immediately name. "I really left," I confirmed. I stayed near the window, keeping the room between us, not obvious enough to be a statement, just enough to be true. "You drove here, Dominic. So talk." He turned to face me fully. And here was the thing about Dominic Ashworth that I had understood for approximately 3 years and never said out loud to anyone, not even Theo. He was intelligent, genuinely, carefully intelligent in the way that some people were who had learned early that intelligence was the only currency that reliably compounded. He had built an entire position inside Elliot's world on the foundation of being indispensable, and he had done it so gradually and so smoothly that by the time anyone might have noticed, the architecture was already load-bearing. I had noticed. I just hadn't known what to do with the noticing, because what do you do when the threat is not dramatic, not obvious, not a villain in any legible way? Just a man who was very good at being exactly what someone needed, positioned precisely where you used to stand. "I want to be honest with you," he said. "That would be a first," I said pleasantly, "but please, go ahead." Something moved across his expression, quickly, controlled. "Elliot and I," he started, then stopped, recalibrated. "What developed between us was not planned. I want you to know that." The room was very quiet. I kept my face exactly where it was. "What developed?" I said. He had the decency to hold my gaze. "It's been building for about a year. Nothing physical, I want to be clear about that. But emotionally," he paused. "Yes. A year." I pressed the sole of my shoe lightly against the floor and said nothing. 1 year of Elliot's emotional attention living somewhere other than inside our bond. 1 year of whatever had been quietly draining out of our marriage finding somewhere else to go. I had felt it in the watch. I had suspected it in the edges of 100 small moments that didn't add up. But hearing it confirmed in Dominic's careful, honest, terribly controlled voice was a different thing entirely. It was the difference between suspecting a fracture and watching it split. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. My voice was even. I was very focused on keeping it even. "Because I think you deserve the truth," he said, "and because I think you already knew." "I did," I said simply. He nodded once, like he'd expected that. "Then you also know," he continued more carefully now, "that Elliot filed that retrieval request this morning not because of me. He filed it because losing you is the first thing in 7 years that has genuinely frightened him." I tilted my head slightly. "And that's supposed to do what for me, exactly?" "It's supposed to matter," Dominic said, "because it means something real is still there, even if it's been buried." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I crossed the room slowly, deliberately, and stopped 3 feet in front of him. Close enough that he would feel the shift in the air between us. Close enough that my psychometry could do what it was already reaching to do. I held out my hand. He looked at it, confused. "Your watch," I said quietly. "Let me hold it for a moment." His expression changed. For the first time since he'd walked through the door, something cracked in his composure. Just slightly. Just enough. "Caleb, you came here to be honest," I said. "So let's be honest." He didn't move for a long moment. Then slowly he unclasped the watch from his wrist and placed it in my palm. It hit me immediately. Not warmth. Not the careful professional composure he wore on his face like a second coat. Fear. Specific, structured, deliberate fear. The fear of a man who had been building something very carefully for a very long time and had just watched the one variable he hadn't accounted for pick up a suitcase and walk out a door. And underneath the fear, layered deeper, older, harder to reach, guilt. Not the guilt of a man who had done something accidentally. The guilt of a man who had made choices. Sequential, intentional choices, and had known exactly what he was doing at every step. I lowered the watch slowly, looked up at him. His face had gone very still. "You didn't fall into this," I said quietly. "Did you?" It wasn't a question, and the answer was in his eyes before he could manage it. "Caleb," he said. His voice had lost its shape entirely. "You need to leave," and I said, "right now, immediately. And when Elliot asks if you came here, I strongly suggest you tell him the truth, because I will." He took the watch back. His fingers closed around it, and then he left. The door closed. Theo materialized at my elbow like a man who had been holding his breath for 4 full minutes. "What did you feel?" he asked. I stared at the closed door. "That it was never an accident," I said. "Any of it. Some people fall into situations, and some people build them, brick by brick, in the dark, and smile while they do it. And Dominic Ashworth was the second kind, and Elliot Graves had no idea." I stood at Theo's window for a long time after Dominic left, not thinking, not planning, just breathing, the way you breathe after something heavy has been set down, slow and deliberate, and aware of the new lightness in your chest where the weight used to be. The truth had a texture to it. I had learned that through years of psychometry. Truth felt different from suspicion. Suspicion was jagged, uncomfortable, full of air pockets. Truth was solid, dense. It sat in your hands with a specific gravity that suspicion never could. I was holding a lot of truth right now. "We need to go," I said quietly. Theo looked up from the couch where he had been sitting with the careful stillness of a man giving me room. "Where?" "The house." I turned from the window. "I need one more object, and then I need Elliot to be there when I touch it." Theo drove. I sat in the passenger seat with my hands folded in my lap and watched Hartford move past the window. The city looked the same as it always had. Ordinary, unhurried. Streets that had no idea what they were carrying this morning. My phone rang once more on the drive. Elliot. I let it ring. When we pulled into the driveway of the Graves estate, Elliot's car was already there. So was another one I didn't recognize, parked at an angle that suggested arrival in a hurry. Theo put the car in park. "You good?" he asked. "I'm done," I said, which was not the same thing, but was somehow more complete. I got out. Elliot opened the front door before I reached it, which meant he had been watching from inside. He stood in the doorway in yesterday's shirt, his hair carrying the particular disorder of a man who had not slept, and when he saw me, his entire face did something unguarded and immediate that he couldn't pull back in time. Relief, raw and total, followed immediately by something more complicated. "Caleb," his voice came out rougher than usual. "You came back." "I came for something," I said. "Not to stay." His jaw tightened. He stepped back and let me in. The house smelled the same, coffee and cedarwood, and the faint ghost of Mason's dinosaur-shaped soap from the upstairs bathroom. I walked through the foyer without looking at the walls, without touching anything, moving directly to the kitchen with the focused calm of someone who knew exactly where they were going. Elliot followed. Theo stayed by the front door, a quiet and loyal witness. I went to the kitchen island. Elliot's keys were sitting there. They were always sitting there, dropped without thought every evening, the same way he dropped everything that didn't require his immediate attention. I had picked them up and hung them on the hook by the door approximately 900 times in 7 years. I picked them up now, and I let my psychometry open. It arrived all at once, the way it always did with objects that had been handled daily for years. Layered, dense. 7 years of Elliot Graves moving through this kitchen, keys in hand, mind elsewhere. I moved through it carefully, searching for what I needed. I found Dominic first. Not recent, older. 18 months ago, which was 6 months earlier than Dominic had implied this morning. A specific memory soaked into the metal. A conversation in this kitchen. Elliot's hand around these keys, restless, turning them over while Dominic spoke. And Dominic's voice, patient and precise, saying something I couldn't hear directly, but could feel the shape of. The emotional imprint of it was deliberate, strategic, the specific sensation of someone moving pieces on a board, and Elliot receiving it, not resisting, but not entirely willing either. Confused, pulled, already being redirected away from something he hadn't thought to protect because he hadn't realized it needed protecting. Me? Dominic had started this earlier and more deliberately than Elliot knew. I set the keys down on the island, looked up at Elliot. He was watching me with that total, focused attention he had finally found, the one that had arrived approximately 8 hours too late. "Dominic didn't fall into this," I said calmly. "He built it. He started 18 months ago. He stood in this kitchen and he laid the first brick while you held your keys and didn't notice what was happening." I kept my voice even, factual. "You weren't entirely willing, but you weren't paying attention. And for Dominic, that was enough." Elliot's face went through several things in rapid succession. Confusion, resistance, the beginning of denial, and then slowly, the specific collapse of a man who was doing the math in real time and arriving at an answer he didn't want. "Caleb," he said, his voice had lost its structure entirely. "I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. "That's not the part I'm leaving over." He went very still. "Then what?" he said, barely a sound. "I'm leaving because for 7 years I was standing right next to you and you didn't notice me long enough to be manipulated away from me." I kept my voice quiet, not cruel, just honest in the way that only complete stillness can be. "Dominic found a gap. You gave him that gap. You gave it to him every morning when you walked past me without seeing me. Every event you attended without asking if I wanted to come. Every time Mason called for me in the night and you didn't hear him because you were already somewhere else in your own head." I paused. "He just walked through a door you left open for 7 years. Elliot's breath left him audibly. "I can fix this," he said. The words came out desperate and immediate. "Caleb, I can fix this. 30 days. Give me 30 days and I will show you I can see you." I looked at him. At the genuine wreck of his expression, the fear in it, the desperation. This was real. I could see that it was real. Elliot Graves was standing in his kitchen coming apart at the seams, and it was entirely, completely genuine. And it was 7 years too late. "You don't get to love me now," I said. The words landed. I watched them land. His face broke open in a way I had never seen in all the years I had known him. Not controlled anguish, not managed emotion. Something total and unguarded and too late. Please, he said. Just that. Just the one word, stripped of everything else. I picked up my bag from the counter where I had set it. I didn't leave to come back, Elliot. He stepped forward. One hand came up, reaching, not grabbing, just reaching, the way people reach for things that are already gone. Caleb, wait, please. Just wait. I looked at his hand. Then I looked at his face one final time. Water Mason's dinosaur plants on Thursdays, I said quietly. He'll remind you, but try to remember on your own. He notices when people remember things without being asked. I walked past him, through the kitchen, through the foyer, past the wedding photo on the wall that I did not touch, past the hook where I had hung his keys 900 times. Theo opened the front door as I reached it. The October air came in cold and clean. I walked through it without pausing, without looking back. Behind me, I heard Elliot make a sound, not a word, just a sound, low and broken and swallowed almost immediately by the silence of a house that was very large and now very empty. I got in Theo's car. He drove. I looked forward. The Omega he ignored for 7 years never came back. And somewhere in that house, an alpha finally understood the weight of the word too late. Some lessons arrive right on time, and some arrive exactly that, too late. Thank you for staying until the very end of this story. If this one stayed with you, the next one will hit even deeper. Don't miss what's coming next. Subscribe now. The next story drops soon.